The Teaching of Vimalakīrti, Chapter 3. The Disciples and the Bodhisattva's Reluctance to Visit Vimalakīrti. Then the Lichavi Vimalakīrti thought to himself, I am sick, lying on my bed in pain, yet the Tathagata, the Arhat, the perfectly accomplished Buddha, does not consider me or take pity upon me, and sends no one to inquire after my illness. The Lord knew this thought in the mind of Vimalakīrti, and said to the Venerable Shariputra, Shariputra, go to inquire after the illness of the Lichavi Vimalakīrti. Thus addressed, the Venerable Shariputra answered the Buddha, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to ask the Lichavi Vimalakīrti about his illness. Why? I remember one day, when I was sitting at the foot of a tree in the forest, absorbed in contemplation, the Lichavi Vimalakīrti came to the foot of that tree and said to me, Reverend Shariputra, this is not the way to absorb yourself in contemplation. You should absorb yourself in contemplation so that neither body nor mind appear anywhere in the three realms. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that you can manifest all ordinary behavior without forsaking cessation. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that you can manifest the nature of an ordinary person without abandoning your cultivated spiritual nature. You should absorb yourself in contemplation so that the mind neither settles within nor moves without toward external forms. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that the 37 aids to enlightenment are manifest without deviation toward any convictions. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that you are released in liberation without abandoning the passions that are the province of the world. Reverend Shariputra, those who absorb themselves in contemplation in such a way are declared by the Lord to be truly absorbed in contemplation. Lord, when I heard this teaching, I was unable to reply and remained silent. Therefore, I am reluctant to go to ask that good man about his sickness. The Buddha then said to the Venerable Mahāyāna, Mahāyāna, go to the Lichavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Mahāyāna replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to the Lichavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Why? I remember one day when I was teaching the Dharma to the householders in a square in the great city of Vaishali, and the Lichavi Vimalakīrti came along and said to me, Reverend Mahāyāna, that is not the way to teach the Dharma to the householders in their white clothes. The Dharma must be taught according to reality. Reverend Mahāyāna, the Dharma is without a living being, because it is free of the dust of living beings. It is selfless, because it is free of the dust of desire. It is lifeless, because it is free of birth and death. It is without a person, because it dispenses with past origins and future destinies. The Dharma is peace and pacification, because it is free of desire. It does not become an object, because it is free of words and letters. It is inexpressible, and it transcends all movement of mind. The Dharma is omnipresent, because it is like infinite space. It is without color, mark, or shape, because it is free of all process. It is without the concept of mine, because it is free of the habitual notion of possession. It is without ideation, because it is free of mind, thought, or consciousness. It is incomparable, because it has no antithesis. It is without presumption of conditionality, because it does not conform to causes. It permeates evenly all things, because all are included in the ultimate realm. It conforms to reality by means of the process of nonconformity. It abides at the reality limit for it is utterly without fluctuation. It is immovable, because it is independent of the 6 objects of sense. It is without coming and going, for it never stands still. It is comprised by voidness. It is remarkable through signlessness, and because of wishlessness it is free of presumption and repudiation. It is without establishment and rejection, without birth or destruction. It is without any fundamental consciousness, transcending the range of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and thought. It is without highness and lowness. It abides without movement or activity. Reverend Mahama Udgayayana, how could there be a teaching in regard to such a Dharma? Reverend Mahama Udgayayana, even the expression to teach the Dharma is presumptuous, and those who listen to it listen to presumption. Reverend Ma Udgayayana, where there are no presumptuous words, there is no teacher of the Dharma, no one to listen, and no one to understand. It is as if an illusory person were to teach the Dharma to illusory people. Therefore, you should teach the Dharma by keeping your mind on this. You should be adept in regard to the spiritual faculties of living beings. By means of the correct vision of the wisdom eye, manifesting the great compassion, acknowledging the benevolent activity of the Buddha, purifying your intentions, and understanding the definitive expressions of the Dharma, you should teach the Dharma in order that the continuity of the 3 jewels may never be interrupted. Lord, when Vimalakīrti had discoursed thus, 800 householders in the crowd conceived the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment, and I myself was speechless. Therefore, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to this good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the Venerable Mahākāśyapa, Mahākāśyapa, you go to the Lichavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to the Lichavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Why? I remember one day when I was in the street of the poor begging for my food, the Lichavi Vimalakīrti came along and said to me, Reverend Mahākāśyapa, to avoid the houses of the wealthy and to favor the houses of the poor, this is partiality and benevolence. Reverend Mahākāśyapa, you should dwell on the fact of the equality of things, and you should seek alms with consideration for all living beings at all times. You should beg your food in awareness of the ultimate non-existence of food. You should seek alms for the sake of eliminating the materialism of others. When you enter a town, you should keep in mind its actual voidness. Yet you should proceed through it in order to develop men and women. You should enter homes as if entering the family of the Buddha. You should accept alms by not taking anything. You should see form like a man blind from birth, hear sounds as if they were echoes, smell scents as if they were like wind, experience tastes without any discrimination, touch tangible objects without there being in gnosis any contact, and know things with the consciousness of an illusory creature. That which is without a state of being, self, and a state of being, other, does not burn, and what does not burn will not be extinguished. Elder Mahākāśyapa, if, equipoised in the 8 liberations without transcending the 8 perverse paths, you can enter the sameness of reality by means of the sameness of perversity, and if you can make a gift to all living beings, and an offering to all the noble ones and Buddhas out of even a single measure of alms, then you yourself may eat. Thus, when you eat, after offering, you should be neither affected by afflictions nor free of afflictions, neither involved in concentration nor free of concentration, neither living in the world nor abiding in liberation. Furthermore, those who give such alms, Reverend, have neither great merit nor small merit, neither gain nor loss. They should follow the way of the Buddhas, not the way of the disciples. Only in this way, Elder Mahākāssapa, is the practice of eating by alms meaningful. Lord, when I heard this teaching, I was astonished and thought, reverence to all bodhisattvas. If a lay bodhisattva may be endowed with such eloquence, who is there who would not conceive the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment? From that time forth, I no longer recommend the vehicles of the disciples and of the solitary sages, but recommend the Mahāyāna. And thus, Lord, I am reluctant to go to this good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the venerable Subhuti, Subhuti, go to the Lichavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Subhuti replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to this good man to inquire about his illness. Why? My lord, I remember one day when I went to beg my food at the house of the Lichavi Vimalakīrti in the great city of Vaishali. He took my bowl and filled it with some excellent food, and said to me, Reverend Subhuti, take this food if you understand the sameness of all things through the sameness of material objects, and if you understand the sameness of the qualities of the Buddha through the sameness of all things. Take this food if, without abandoning desire, hatred, and folly, you can avoid association with them. If you can follow the path of the single way without ever disturbing the egoistic views, if neither conquering ignorance and the craving for existence, nor producing knowledge and liberation, your liberation being the same as the equality of the uninterruptible sins, you are neither liberated nor bound. If you do not see the Four Noble Truths, yet are not one who has not seen the truth, if you are also neither one who has attained fruition, nor an ordinary person, while not having eliminated the qualities of an ordinary person, if you are not a noble one and not a non-noble one, and if, though you are in the presence of all things, you are free of any notion of all things. Take this food, Reverend Subhuti, if without seeing the Buddha, hearing the Dharma, or serving the Sangha, you undertake the religious life under the 6 outsider masters, namely Purana Kashyapa, Maskarin Ghoshaliputra, Samjayin Varatiputra, Kakuda Katyayana, Ajita Keshakambala, and Niyagranta Janatiputra, and follow the ways they prescribe. Take this food, Reverend Subhuti, if, entertaining all false views, you find neither extremes nor middle. If, bound up in the 8 adversities, you do not obtain favorable conditions. If, assimilating the passions, you do not attain purification. If the dispassion of all living beings is your dispassion, Reverend. If those who make offerings to you are not thereby purified. If those who offer you food, Reverend, still fall into the 3 bad migrations. If you associate with all Maras. If you entertain all passions. If the nature of passions is the nature of a reverend. If you have hostile feelings toward all living beings. If you despise all the Buddhas. If you criticize all the teachings of the Buddha. If you do not rely on the Sangha. And finally, if you never enter ultimate liberation. Lord, when I heard these words of the Lichavi Vimalakīrti, I wondered what I should say and what I should do, but I was totally in the dark. Leaving the bowl, I was about to leave the house, when the Lichavi Vimalakīrti said to me, Reverend Subhuti, do not fear these words, and pick up your bowl. What do you think, Reverend Subhuti? If it were an incarnation created by the Tathagata who spoke thus to you, would you be afraid? I answered, No, indeed, noble sir. He then said, Reverend Subhuti, the nature of all things is like illusion, like a magical incarnation, so you should not fear them. Why? All words also have that nature, and thus the wise are not attached to words, nor do they fear them. Why? All language does not ultimately exist, except as liberation. The nature of all things is liberation. When Vimalakīrti had discoursed in this way, 200 gods obtained the pure doctrinal vision in regard to all things, without obscurity or defilement, and 500 gods obtained the conformative tolerance. As for me, I was speechless and unable to respond to him. Therefore, Lord, I am reluctant to go to this good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the Venerable Purnamitra Yaniputra, Purna, go to the Lichavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Purna replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to this good man to inquire about his illness. Why? Lord, I remember one day, when I was teaching the Dhamma to some young monks in the great forest, the Lichavi Vimalakīrti came there and said to me, Reverend Purna, first concentrate yourself. Regard the minds of these young bhikshus, and then teach them the Dhamma. Do not put rotten food into a jeweled bowl. First, understand the inclinations of these monks, and do not confuse priceless sapphires with glass beads. Reverend Purna, without examining the spiritual faculties of living beings, do not presume upon the one-sidedness of their faculties. Do not wound those who are without wounds. Do not impose a narrow path upon those who aspire to a great path. Do not try to pour the great ocean into the hoofprint of an ox. Do not try to put Mount Sumeru into a grain of mustard. Do not confuse the brilliance of the sun with the light of a glowworm. And do not expose those who admire the roar of a lion to the howl of a jackal. Reverend Purna, all these monks were formerly engaged in the Mahāyāna, but have forgotten the spirit of enlightenment. So do not instruct them in the disciple vehicle. The disciple vehicle is not ultimately valid, and you disciples are like men blind from birth in regard to recognition of the degrees of the spiritual faculties of living beings. At that moment, the Lichavi Vimalakīrti entered into such a concentration that those monks were caused to remember their various former lives, in which they had produced the roots of virtue by serving 500 Buddhas for the sake of perfect enlightenment. As soon as their own spirits of enlightenment had become clear to them, they bowed at the feet of that good man and pressed their palms together in reverence. He taught them the Dhamma, and they all attained the stage of irreversibility from unexcelled perfect enlightenment. It occurred to me then, the disciples who do not know the thoughts or the inclinations of others are not able to teach the Dhamma to anyone. Why? These disciples are not expert in discerning the superiority and inferiority of the spiritual faculties of living beings, and they are not always in a state of concentration like the Tathagata, the Arhat, the perfectly accomplished Buddha. Therefore, Lord, I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his health. The Buddha then said to the Venerable Mahākaccayana, Kaccayana, go to the Lichavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Kaccayana replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. Why? Lord, I remember one day, when, after the Lord had given some brief instruction to the monks, I was defining the expressions of that discourse by teaching the meaning of impermanence, suffering, selflessness, and peace. The Licchavi Vimalakīrti came there and said to me, Reverend Mahāyāna, do not teach an ultimate reality endowed with activity, production, and destruction. Reverend Mahāyāna, nothing was ever destroyed, is destroyed, or will ever be destroyed. Such is the meaning of impermanence. The meaning of the realization of birthlessness, through the realization of the voidness of the five aggregates, is the meaning of suffering. The fact of the non-duality of self and selflessness is the meaning of selflessness. That which has no intrinsic substance and no other sort of substance does not burn, and what does not burn is not extinguished. Such lack of extinction is the meaning of peace. When he had discoursed thus, the minds of the monks were liberated from their defilements and entered a state of non-grasping. Therefore, Lord, I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the Venerable Aniruddha, Aniruddha, go to the Licchavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Reverend Aniruddha, you have been proclaimed by the Buddha to be the foremost among those who possess the divine eye. To what distance does the divine vision of the Venerable Aniruddha extend? I answered, Friends, I see the entire billion-world galactic universe of the Lord Shakyamuni just as plainly as a man of ordinary vision sees a myrobalan nut on the palm of his hand. When I had said these words, the Licchavi Vimalakīrti came there, and having bowed his head at my feet, said to me, Reverend Aniruddha, is your divine eye compounded in nature, or is it uncompounded in nature? If it is compounded in nature, it is the same as the superknowledges of the outsiders. If it is uncompounded in nature, then it is not constructed and as such is incapable of seeing. Then how do you see, O elder? At these words I became speechless, and Brahma also was amazed to hear this teaching from that good man. Having bowed to him, he said, Who then in the world possesses the divine eye? Vimalakīrti answered, In the world it is the Buddhas who have the divine eye. They see all the Buddha fields without even leaving their state of concentration and without being affected by duality. Having heard these words, the 10,000 Brahmas were inspired with high resolve and conceived the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. Having paid homage and respect both to me and to that good man, they disappeared. As for me, I remain speechless, and therefore I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the Venerable Upali, Upali, go to the Licchavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Upali replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. Why? Lord, I remember that one day there were 2 monks who had committed some infraction and were too ashamed to appear before the Lord. So they came to me and said, Reverend Upali, we have both committed an infraction, but are too ashamed to appear before the Buddha. Venerable Upali, kindly remove our anxieties by absolving us of these infractions. Lord, while I was giving those 2 monks some religious discourse, the Licchavi Vimalakīrti came there and said to me, Reverend Upali, do not aggravate further the sins of these 2 monks. Without perplexing them, relieve their remorse. Reverend Upali, sin is not to be apprehended within, or without, or between the two. Why? The Buddha has said, living beings are afflicted by the passions of thought, and they are purified by the purification of thought. Reverend Upali, The mind is neither within nor without, nor is it to be apprehended between the two. Sin is just the same as the mind, and all things are just the same as sin. They do not escape this same reality. Reverend Upali, this nature of the mind, by virtue of which your mind, Reverend, is liberated, does it ever become afflicted? Never, I replied. Reverend Upali, the minds of all living beings have that very nature. Reverend Upali, conceptualization is total affliction, and not conceptualizing and not discriminating is their true nature. Misapprehension is total affliction, and non-misapprehension is their true nature. The presumption of self is total affliction, and selflessness is their true nature. Reverend Upali, all things are without production, destruction, and duration, like magical illusions, clouds, and lightning. All things are evanescent, not remaining even for an instant. All things are like dreams, hallucinations, and unreal visions. All things are like the reflection of the moon in water, and like a mirror image. They are born of mental construction. Those who know this are called the true upholders of the discipline, and those disciplined in that way are indeed well disciplined. Then the two monks said, "This householder is extremely well endowed with wisdom. The Reverend Upali, who was proclaimed by the Lord as the foremost of the upholders of the discipline, is not his equal." I then said to the two monks, "Do not entertain the notion that he is a mere householder." Why? With the exception of the Tathagata himself, there is no disciple or bodhisattva capable of competing with his eloquence or rivaling the brilliance of his wisdom. Thereupon the two monks, delivered from their anxieties and inspired with a high resolve, conceived the spirit of unexcelled, perfect enlightenment. Bowing down to that good man, they made the wish, "May all living beings attain eloquence such as this. Therefore, I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness." The Buddha then said to the Venerable Rahula, "Rahula, go to the Lichavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness." Rahula replied, "Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness." Why? "Lord, I remember that one day many young Lichavi gentlemen came to the place where I was and said to me, 'Reverend Rahula, you are the son of the Lord, and having renounced a kingdom of a universal monarch, you have left the world. What are the virtues and benefits you saw in leaving the world?' As I was teaching them properly the benefits and virtues of renouncing the world, the Lichavi Vimalakīrti came there, and, having greeted me, said, 'Reverend Rahula, you should not teach the benefits and virtues of renunciation in the way that you do.' Why? Renunciation is itself the very absence of virtues and benefits. Reverend Rahula, one may speak of benefits and virtues in regard to compounded things, but renunciation is uncompounded, and there can be no question of benefits and virtues in regard to the uncompounded. Reverend Rahula, renunciation is not material, but is free of matter. It is free of the extreme views of beginning and end. It is the path of liberation. It is praised by the wise, embraced by the noble ones, and causes the defeat of all Maras. It liberates from the 5 states of existence, purifies the 5 eyes, cultivates the 5 powers, and supports the 5 spiritual faculties. Renunciation is totally harmless to others, and is not adulterated with evil things. It disciplines the outsiders, transcending all denominations. It is the bridge over the swamp of desire, without grasping, and free of the habits of I and mine. It is without attachment and without disturbance, eliminating all commotion. It disciplines one's own mind and protects the minds of others. It favors mental quiescence and stimulates transcendental analysis. It is irreproachable in all respects, and so is called renunciation. Those who leave the mundane in this way are called truly renunciant. Young men renounce the world in the light of this clear teaching. The appearance of the Buddha is extremely rare. Human life endowed with leisure and opportunity is very hard to obtain. To be a human being is very precious. The young men complained, "But, householder, we have heard the Tathagata declare that one should not renounce the world without the permission of one's parents." Vimalakīrti answered, "Young men, you should cultivate yourselves intensively to conceive the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. That in itself will be your renunciation and high ordination." Thereupon 32 of the Licchavi youths conceived the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. "Therefore, Lord, I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness." The Buddha then said to the Venerable Ananda, "Ananda, go to the Licchavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness." Ananda replied, "Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness." "Why?" "Lord, I remember one day when the body of the Lord manifested some indisposition, and he required some milk. I took the bowl and went to the door of the mansion of a great Brahmin family. The Licchavi Vimalakīrti came there, and having saluted me, said, 'Reverend Ananda, what are you doing on the threshold of this house with your bowl in your hand so early in the morning?' I replied, 'The body of the Lord manifests some indisposition, and he needs some milk. Therefore I have come to fetch some.' Vimalakīrti then said to me, 'Reverend Ananda, do not say such a thing. Reverend Ananda, the body of the Tathagata is tough as a diamond, having eliminated all the instinctual traces of evil, and being endowed with all goodness. How could disease or discomfort affect such a body? Reverend Ananda, go in silence and do not belittle the Lord. Do not say such things to others. It would not be good for the powerful gods or for the bodhisattvas coming from the various Buddha fields to hear such words. Reverend Ananda, a universal monarch who is endowed only with a small root of virtue, is free of diseases. How then could the Lord, who has an infinite root of virtue, have any disease? It is impossible. Reverend Ananda, do not bring shame upon us, but go in silence, lest the outsider sectarian should hear your words. They would say, 'For shame! The teacher of these people cannot even cure his own sicknesses. How then can he cure the sicknesses of others?' Reverend Ananda, go then discreetly, so that no one observes you. Reverend Ananda, the Tathagatas have the body of the Dharma, not a body that is sustained by material food. The Tathagatas have a transcendental body that has transcended all mundane qualities. There is no injury to the body of a Tathagata, as it is rid of all defilements. The body of a Tathagata is uncompounded and free of all formative activity. Reverend Ananda, to believe there can be illness in such a body is irrational and unseemly." When I had heard these words, I wondered if I had previously misheard and misunderstood the Buddha, and I was very much ashamed. Then I heard a voice from the sky, "Ananda, the householder speaks to you truly. Nevertheless, since the Buddha has appeared during the time of the 5 corruptions, he disciplines living beings by acting lowly and humble. Therefore, Ananda, do not be ashamed and go and get the milk." Lord, such was my conversation with the Licchavi Vimalakīrti, and therefore I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. In the same way, the rest of the 500 disciples were reluctant to go to the Licchavi Vimalakīrti, and each told the Buddha his own adventure, recounting all his conversations with the Licchavi Vimalakīrti. The Buddha then said to the Bodhisattva Maitreya, Maitreya, go to the Licchavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Maitreya replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. Why? Lord, I remember that one day I was engaged in a conversation with the gods of the Tushita heaven, the god Samtushita and his retinue, about the stage of non-regression of the great bodhisattvas. At that time, the Licchavi Vimalakīrti came there and addressed me as follows. Maitreya, the Buddha has prophesied that only one more birth stands between you and unexcelled perfect enlightenment. What kind of birth does this prophecy concern, Maitreya? Is it past, is it future, or is it present? If it is a past birth, it is already finished. If it is a future birth, it will never arrive. If it is a present birth, it does not abide. For the Buddha has declared, Bhikshus, in a single moment you are born, you age, you die, you transmigrate, and you are reborn. Then might the prophecy concern birthlessness, but birthlessness applies to the stage of destiny for the ultimate, in which there is neither prophecy nor attainment of perfect enlightenment. Therefore, Maitreya, is your reality from birth, or is it from cessation? Your reality as prophesied is not born and does not cease, nor will it be born, nor will it cease. Furthermore, your reality is just the same as the reality of all living beings, the reality of all things, and the reality of all the holy ones. If your enlightenment can be prophesied in such a way, so can that of all living beings. Why? Because reality does not consist of duality or of diversity. Maitreya, whenever you attain Buddhahood, which is the perfection of enlightenment, at the same time all living beings will also attain Buddhahood. Why? Enlightenment consists of the realizations of all living beings. Maitreya, at the moment when you attain ultimate liberation, all living beings will also attain ultimate liberation. Why? The Tathagatas do not enter ultimate liberation until all living beings have entered ultimate liberation. For, since all living beings are utterly liberated, the Tathagatas see them as having the nature of ultimate liberation. Therefore, Maitreya, do not fool and delude these deities. No one abides in, or regresses from, enlightenment. Maitreya, you should introduce these deities to the repudiation of all discriminative constructions concerning enlightenment. Enlightenment is perfectly realized neither by the body nor by the mind. Enlightenment is the eradication of all marks. Enlightenment is free of presumptions concerning all objects. Enlightenment is free of the functioning of all intentional thoughts. Enlightenment is the annihilation of all convictions. Enlightenment is free from all discriminative constructions. Enlightenment is free from all vacillation, mentation, and agitation. Enlightenment is not involved in any commitments. Enlightenment is the arrival at detachment through freedom from all habitual attitudes. The ground of enlightenment is the ultimate realm. Enlightenment is realization of reality. Enlightenment abides at the reality limit. Enlightenment is without duality, since therein are no minds and no things. Enlightenment is equality, since it is equal to infinite space. Enlightenment is unconstructed, because it is neither born nor destroyed, neither abides nor undergoes any transformation. Enlightenment is the complete knowledge of the thoughts, deeds, and inclinations of all living beings. Enlightenment is not a door for the sense media. Enlightenment is unadulterated, since it is free of the afflictions of the instinctually driven succession of lives. Enlightenment is neither somewhere nor nowhere, abiding in no location or dimension. Enlightenment, not being contained in anything, does not stand in reality. Enlightenment is merely a name, and even that name is motionless. Enlightenment, free of abstention and undertaking, is energyless. There is no agitation in enlightenment, as it is utterly pure by nature. Enlightenment is radiance, pure in essence. Enlightenment is without subjectivity and completely without object. Enlightenment, which penetrates the equality of all things, is undifferentiated. Enlightenment, which is not shown by any example, is incomparable. Enlightenment is subtle, since it is extremely difficult to realize. Enlightenment is all-pervasive, as it has the nature of infinite space. Enlightenment cannot be realized, either physically or mentally. Why? The body is like grass, trees, walls, paths, and optical illusions, and the mind is immaterial, invisible, baseless, and unconscious. Lord, when Vimalakīrti had discoursed thus, 200 of the deities in that assembly attained the tolerance of the birthlessness of things. As for me, Lord, I was rendered speechless. Therefore I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the young Lichavi, Prabhavyuha, Prabhavyuha, go to the Lichavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Prabhavyuha replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. Why? Lord, I remember one day when I was going out of the great city of Vaishali, I met the Lichavi Vimalakīrti coming in. He greeted me, and I then addressed him. Householder, where do you come from? He replied, I come from the seat of enlightenment. I then inquired, what is meant by seat of enlightenment? He then spoke the following words to me. Noble son, the seat of enlightenment is the seat of positive thought, because it is without artificiality. It is the seat of effort, because it releases energetic activities. It is the seat of high resolve, because its insight is superior. It is the seat of the great spirit of enlightenment, because it does not neglect anything. It is the seat of generosity, because it has no expectation of reward. It is the seat of morality, because it fulfills all commitments. It is the seat of tolerance, because it is free of anger toward any living being. It is the seat of effort, because it does not turn back. It is the seat of meditation, because it generates fitness of mind. It is the seat of wisdom, because it sees everything directly. It is the seat of love, because it is equal to all living beings. It is the seat of compassion, because it tolerates all injuries. It is the seat of joy, because it is joyfully devoted to the bliss of the Dharma. It is the seat of equanimity, because it abandons affection and aversion. It is the seat of paranormal perception, because it has the 6 super-knowledges. It is the seat of liberation, because it does not intellectualize. It is the seat of liberative art, because it develops living beings. It is the seat of the means of unification, because it brings together living beings. It is the seat of learning, because it makes practice of the essence. It is the seat of decisiveness, because of its precise discrimination. It is the seat of the aids to enlightenment, because it eliminates the duality of the compounded and uncompounded. It is the seat of truth, because it does not deceive anyone. It is the seat of interdependent origination, because it proceeds from the exhaustion of ignorance to the exhaustion of old age and death. It is the seat of eradication of all afflictions, because it is perfectly enlightened about the nature of reality. It is the seat of all living beings, because all living beings are without intrinsic identity. It is the seat of all things, because it is perfectly enlightened with regard to voidness. It is the seat of the conquest of all devils, because it never flinches. It is the seat of the triple world, because it is free of involvement. It is the seat of the heroism that sounds the lion's roar, because it is free of fear and trembling. It is the seat of the strengths, the fearlessnesses, and all the special qualities of the Buddha, because it is irreproachable in all respects. It is the seat of the three knowledges, because in it no passions remain. It is the seat of instantaneous, total understanding of all things, because it realizes fully the gnosis of omniscience. Noble son, when bodhisattvas are thus endowed with the transcendences, the roots of virtue, the ability to develop living beings, and the incorporation of the holy Dharma, whether they lift up their feet or put them down, they all come from the seat of enlightenment. They come from the qualities of the Buddha, and stand on the qualities of the Buddha. Lord, when Vimalakīrti had explained this teaching, 500 gods and men conceived the spirit of enlightenment, and I became speechless. Therefore, Lord, I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the Bodhisattva Jagatindhara, Jagatindhara, go to the Licchavi Vimalakīrti to inquire about his illness. Jagatindhara replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. Why? Lord, I remember that one day when I was at home, the wicked Mara, disguised as Shakra and surrounded with 12,000 heavenly maidens, approached me with the sounds of music and singing. Having saluted me by touching my feet with his head, he withdrew with his retinue to one side. I then, thinking he was Shakra, the king of the gods, said to him, Welcome, O Kaushika. You should remain consciously aware in the midst of the pleasures of desire. You should often think on impermanence and strive to utilize the essential in body, life, and wealth. Mara then said to me, Good sir, accept from me these 12,000 divine maidens, and make them your servants. I replied, O Kaushika, do not offer me, who am religious and a son of the Shakya, things which are not appropriate. It is not proper for me to have these maidens. No sooner had I said these words, than the Licchavi Vimalakīrti came there and said to me, Noble son, do not think that this is Shakra. This is not Shakra, but the evil Mara, who has come to ridicule you. Then the Licchavi Vimalakīrti said to Mara, Evil Mara, since these heavenly maidens are not suitable for this religious devotee, a son of the Shakya, give them to me. Then Mara was terrified and distressed, thinking that the Licchavi Vimalakīrti had come to expose him. He tried to make himself invisible, but try as he might with all his magical powers, he could not vanish from sight. Then a voice resounded in the sky, saying, Evil one, give these heavenly maidens to the good man Vimalakīrti, and only then will you be able to return to your own abode. Then Mara was even more frightened, and much against his will, gave the heavenly maidens. The Licchavi Vimalakīrti, having received the goddesses, said to them, Now that you have been given to me by Mara, you should all conceive the spirit of unexcelled, perfect enlightenment. He then exhorted them with discourse suitable for their development toward enlightenment, and soon they conceived the spirit of enlightenment. He then said to them, You have just conceived the spirit of enlightenment. From now on you should devote yourselves to finding joy in the pleasures of the Dharma, and should take no pleasure in desires. They then asked him, "What is joy in the pleasures of the Dharma?" He declared, "It is the joy of unbreakable faith in the Buddha, of wishing to hear the Dharma, of serving the Sangha and honoring the spiritual benefactors without pride. It is the joy of renunciation of the whole world, of not being fixed in objects, of considering the five aggregates to be like murderers, of considering the elements to be like venomous serpents, and of considering the sense media to be like an empty town. It is the joy of always guarding the spirit of enlightenment, of helping living beings, of sharing through generosity, of not slackening in morality, of control and tolerance in patience, of thorough cultivation of virtue by effort, of total absorption in meditation, and of absence of afflictions in wisdom. It is the joy of extending enlightenment, of conquering the maras, of destroying the afflictions, and of purifying the Buddha field. It is the joy of accumulating all virtues in order to cultivate the auspicious marks and signs. It is the joy of the liberation of non-intimidation when hearing the profound teaching. It is the joy of exploration of the three doors of liberation and of the realization of liberation. It is the joy of being an ornament of the seat of enlightenment and of not attaining liberation at the wrong time. It is the joy of serving those of equal fortune, of not hating or resenting those of superior fortune, of serving the spiritual benefactors, and of avoiding sinful friends. It is the joy of the superior gladness of faith and devotion to the Dharma. It is the joy of acquiring liberative arts, and of the conscious cultivation of the aids to enlightenment. Thus the Bodhisattva admires and finds joy in the delights of the Dharma. Thereupon Mara said to the goddesses, "Now come along and let us return home." They said, "You gave us to this householder. Now we should enjoy the delights of the Dharma and should no longer enjoy the pleasures of desires." Then Mara said to the Licchavi Vimalakīrti, "If it is so that the Bodhisattva, the spiritual hero, has no mental attachment and gives away all his possessions, then, householder, please give me these goddesses." Vimalakīrti replied, "They are given, Mara. Go home with your retinue. May you fulfill the religious aspirations of all living beings." Then the goddesses, saluting Vimalakīrti, said to him, "Householder, how should we live in the abode of the Maras?" Vimalakīrti replied, "Sisters, there is a door of the Dharma called the Inexhaustible Lamp. Practice it." "What is it?" "Sisters, a single lamp may light hundreds of thousands of lamps without itself ever being diminished. Likewise, sisters, a single bodhisattva may establish many hundreds of thousands of living beings in enlightenment without his mindfulness being diminished. In fact, not only does it not diminish, it grows stronger. Likewise, the more you teach and demonstrate virtuous qualities to others, the more you grow with respect to these virtuous qualities. This is the door of the Dharma called the Inexhaustible Lamp. When you are living in the realm of Mara, inspire innumerable gods and goddesses with the spirit of enlightenment. In such a way you will repay the kindness of the Tathagata, and you will become the benefactors of all living beings." Then those goddesses bowed at the feet of the Licchavi Vimalakīrti and departed in the company of Mara. Thus, Lord, I saw the supremacy of the magical power, wisdom, and eloquence of the Licchavi Vimalakīrti, and therefore I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the merchant's son Sudatta, "Noble son, go to the Licchavi Vimalakīrti, to inquire about his illness. Sudatta replied, "Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness." "Why?" "Lord, I remember one day in my father's house, when in order to celebrate a great sacrifice, I was bestowing gifts on religious devotees, Brahmins, the poor, the wretched, the unfortunate, beggars, and all the needy. On the seventh and final day of this great sacrifice, the Lichavi Vimalakīrti came there and said, 'Merchant's son, you should not celebrate a sacrifice in this way. You should celebrate a Dharma sacrifice. What is the use of the sacrifice of material things?' I then asked him, 'How does one give a Dharma sacrifice?' He replied, 'A Dharma sacrifice is that which develops living beings without beginning or end, giving gifts to them all simultaneously.' What is that? It consists of the great love which is consummated in enlightenment, of the great compassion consummated in the concentration of the holy Dharma on the liberation of all living beings, of the great joy consummated in the awareness of the supreme happiness of all living beings, and of the great equanimity consummated in concentration through knowledge. The Dharma sacrifice consists of the transcendence of generosity, which is consummated in peacefulness and self-discipline, of the transcendence of morality, which is consummated in the moral development of immoral beings, of the transcendence of tolerance, consummated through the principle of selflessness, of the transcendence of effort, consummated in initiative toward enlightenment, of the transcendence of meditation, consummated in the solitude of body and mind, and of the transcendence of wisdom, consummated in the omniscient gnosis. The Dharma sacrifice consists of the meditation of voidness, consummated in effectiveness in the development of all living beings, of the meditation of signlessness, consummated in the purification of all compounded things, and of the meditation of wishlessness, consummated in voluntarily assuming rebirths. The Dharma sacrifice consists of heroic strength, consummated in the upholding of the holy Dharma, of the power of life, consummated in the means of unification, of the absence of pride, consummated in becoming the slave and the disciple of all living beings, of the gain of body, health, and wealth, consummated by the extraction of essence from the essenceless, of mindfulness, consummated by the 6 remembrances, of positive thought, consummated through the truly enjoyable Dharma, of purity of livelihood, consummated by correct spiritual practice, of the respect of noble ones, consummated by joyful and faithful service, of soberness of mind, consummated by absence of dislike for ordinary people, of high resolve, consummated by renunciation, of skill in erudition, consummated by religious practice, of retirement in solitary retreats, consummated by understanding things free of afflictions, of introspective meditation, consummated by attainment of the Buddha gnosis, of the stage of the practice of yoga, consummated by the yoga of liberating all living beings from their afflictions. The Dharma sacrifice consists of the store of merit which is consummated by the auspicious signs and marks, the ornaments of the Buddha fields, and all other means of development of living beings, of the store of knowledge which is consummated in the ability to teach the Dharma according to the thoughts and actions of all living beings, of the store of wisdom which is consummated in the uniform gnosis, free of acceptance and rejection in regard to all things, of the store of all roots of virtue, consummated in the abandonment of all afflictions, obscurations, and unvirtuous things, and of the attainment of all the aids to enlightenment, consummated in the realization of the gnosis of omniscience, as well as in accomplishment of all virtue. That, noble son, is the Dharma sacrifice. The bodhisattva who lives by this Dharma sacrifice is the best of sacrifices, and through his extreme sacrifice is himself worthy of offerings from all people, including the gods. Lord, as soon as the householder had discoursed thus, 200 Brahmins among the crowd of Brahmins present conceived the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. And I, full of astonishment, having saluted this good man by touching his feet with my head, took from around my neck a necklace of pearls worth 100,000 pieces of gold, and offered it to him. But he would not accept it. I then said to him, "Please accept, good man, this necklace of pearls, out of compassion for me, and give it to whomsoever you wish." Then Vimalakīrti took the pearls and divided them into 2 halves. He gave 1 half of them to the lowliest poor of the city, who had been disdained by those present at the sacrifice. The other half he offered to the Tathagata Dushprasaha, and he performed a miracle such that all present beheld the universe called Marichi and the Tathagata Dushprasaha. On the head of the Tathagata Dushprasaha, the pearl necklace took the form of a pavilion, decorated with strings of pearls, resting on 4 bases, with 4 columns, symmetrical, well-constructed, and lovely to behold. Having shown such a miracle, Vimalakīrti said, "The giver who makes gifts to the lowliest poor of the city, considering them as worthy of offering as the Tathagata himself, and the giver who gives without any discrimination, impartially, with no expectation of reward, and with great love, that giver, I say, totally fulfills the Dharma sacrifice." Then the poor of the city, having seen that miracle, and having heard that teaching, conceived the spirit of unexcelled, perfect enlightenment. Therefore, Lord, I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. In the same way, all the bodhisattvas, the great spiritual heroes, told the stories of their conversations with Vimalakīrti and declared their reluctance to go to him.